Okay guys, today we're going to run through R32 GTR coilover installation and the proper setup method for 90% of the coilovers out there. First thing we're going to do is come into the boot. We're sort of lucky on this particular vehicle as someone's cut a rather large hole for, I would assume, a rear strut brace in the past. Now, if you don't have this hole, you remove these two scrivets, and there's a couple of clips in behind here, and this whole rear section will pop out. That applies to both sides. Once that pops out, we can get in and access the top two bolts. Now we're going to go ahead and undo those, so I'm going to undo those and we'll come back to you shortly. Okay, so we've removed those top two nuts. Now we're going to, in this case we're on a hoist, so we're able to raise the vehicle up into the air. So we're going to go ahead and raise the vehicle up. So once we get the vehicle up to a suitable working height, we're going to come around to the back and we'll find this bolt, which is a 17mm. Now it is a bolt and nut, so we're going to require a spanner, and in this case we're going to use a rattle gun to remove. So once we've loosened this bolt off, we can go ahead and remove this bolt, which is obviously not that easy with one hand. After that bolt's removed, now this is where it's important to make sure you've jacked your car up high enough. Obviously this doesn't apply if you work on a hoist, but you'll grab the base of the coilover or suspension and come straight down through the A-arm. Now, what we're going to achieve by removing this is we can set up the proper stroke of the coilover. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and loosen off the main two lock nuts that will secure the spring. We're going to remove the top hat and the bolt, remove the spring, put it all back together, put it back into the vehicle, and then compress the strut so that we're ensuring that it's getting full travel and the wheel's not going to bottom out on any part of the vehicle. Alright, so we've got them loosened off the locking nut. We're going to then loosen the bottom collar so that the spring is free. You can see that it's now moving up and down. We do this to ensure that there's no pressure on the spring. Now, on this particular model of BC coilover, it's a 14mm spanner, and you undo the retaining nut. You can then remove the dampening control, which is just simply a little Allen key section that drops into the top. You sort of locate and ensure that it removes. Now, we can remove this, set that aside so that it's not lost. Then we're going to remove the 17mm nylock nut from the top. Easiest way to do this is with a rattle gun. If you don't have access to a rattle gun, you want to grab a 5mm Allen key, put that down the guts, and then use a 17mm ring spanner and slowly loosen it off. Once you've undone your 17mm nut, you're going to remove that completely, set that aside. Now, normally I grab these as a full assembly and lift off, but just for reference, in case you're ever doing it and drop something, big metal nut, rubber sleeve, and then you've got an internal crush tube. Now it's important to make sure that you keep track of the order that these come apart in. So I'm going to sit this aside. We're going to lift up our spring. Take that spring right off. So go ahead, put the top hat back on. Once the top hat's back on, we're going to go and do the nut back up. We're going to reinstall it on the car. Okay, so we've got the top hat back in the car. Once again, back up through the top. Once we've got it up and in, we're going to put the bolt back into the bottom mount. So our bottom bolt's back in the mount. I'm going to re-engage the top bolts so that no damage is done to the coilover. Then I'm going to put the wheel back on and jack the wheel up to ensure that we can enable full travel without bottoming out on the system. We've gone through, re-engaged the top bolts for the strut assembly. Now, Important thing to know is when you're setting your coilovers up this way, you need to make sure that the wheel isn't forcing against any part of the opposite side of the suspension. Now to ensure this, we're going to have to remove this sway bar link. Okay, so we've gone ahead and put the wheel back on. What we're going to do now is we're going to jack up the rear arm. In this case, we're going to jack up off the rear arm. If you're playing at home and doing an install at home, you can also jack up off the rear wheel. It just stops you from having the ability to turn the wheel. Alright, so we've gone ahead and jacked up the wheel. Now, visually, there may not be anything that looks like you can't go any higher with your vehicle. However, on this vehicle, and this is something to keep an eye on, the top arm has actually bottomed out on the strut. If you were to drive along and continue driving like this, you will potentially damage your strut. You will bend it. So this is going to be our limiting point. We're actually going to adjust the strut so that you're a couple of mil away from that arm at full compression. Grab the base and wind it out. By winding this outwards, so we're grabbing the whole entire tube assembly at the moment, we are lengthening how long our shock is at full compression. We're going to go out a couple of turns. Now, an easy way to keep track of how far you've gone out is keeping an eye on this collar here. As you can see, as we're going up, the collar's moving away. Alright, so what we're going to do is we're going to jack it back up again and ensure that we can't bottom our suspension out, which we still can, so we still need to come out further. I'm going to go ahead and wind this out so it no longer touches, and we'll be back with you soon. Okay, so we've correctly adjusted our base seat. Now, a lot of people will call this base height adjustable coilovers. There's a debate about whether that's correct or not. I like to more refer to it as adjustable length coilover. Once again, that may not be correct, but the main thing you're going to notice is our full suspension at full droop. We can nearly get 4 fingers between the wheel arch and the top of the tyre. Now, if we come around to the passenger side, where we haven't adjusted anything and they're still as BC set them up from the factory, we're struggling to get 2. Another important thing to know about this particular installation is he is still running the factory GTR wheels. So in that case, we know that nothing is going to bottom out apart from our A-arm on the coilover. Now, if you're running a larger wheel, you need to ensure that you're not going to bottom out on your wheel arches, inner guards, or any of your suspension components. The point of doing this adjustment is so that at no point during the compression of the suspension, any part will bottom out on your vehicle. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead, remove the strut assembly from the vehicle, and we'll go. So here's a shot of the coilover strut assembly removed from the vehicle, and just here you can see how much we've lengthened the shock in order to prevent any bottoming out damage. So what we're going to do is we're going to wind this collar with ensuring that the tube doesn't relocate. We're going to wind this all the way down, ensure that it seats correctly in the tube, and then tighten the hell out of it. Now, just a little note, if you're doing this on your race car, look, I probably recommend that you go around and do all 4 corners. However, as this is not a race car and it's a street driven vehicle and it's running the same tyres all the way around, we can do a little bit of a cheat. And what we're going to do is we're going to take a measurement from the base of the lock nut to the top, which we're coming in at straight down about 16.7 millimeters. So what we can do is reproduce this measurement on the other side of the car and save us going through this process. Now this is where we're going to get into probably a little bit of debate on this video. I don't care what your brother's, sister's, uncle's, cousin, boy racer, stance king says. Now we have locked this nut, it is adjusted for your vehicle. This particular setup ensures that nothing on your tyre or suspension is going to bottom out. It is going to stop on the bump stop. That is how the suspension is designed to be set up. Now what we're going to do is we're going to once again refit this back to the vehicle. We don't need to tighten any of the bolts apart from the top bolts. We want this bottom bolt to be able to pivot. We want the suspension to be able to work properly. We're not going to tighten this bottom bolt because it is a rubber encapsulated bush. It must be tightened with the vehicle at standing height. That means with all the vehicle weight on it. If you tighten this bolt up, or any of the other suspension bolts that are rubber encapsulated bushes, with the suspension either at full compression or full droop, they will tear. So we've got the strut refitted to the car, bottom bolts in, not tight, and we've reconnected our sway bar link so the suspension will work with the other side. In the meantime, what we've done is we've set up the other side exactly the same way, and what we're going to do is we're going to snug the coilover up until we can feel it basically encapsulate. So right about there I'm starting to get a little bit of tension to the point that, you know, I can't just freely move it with my fingers. That's going to be our starting set. What we're going to do now is put the wheels back on, lower the vehicle and see where our suspension is sitting. We'll go from there and making further adjustments. Our next process is going through ensuring that our ride height is what we want it set at. Now you can already see that the vehicle's come up quite a substantial amount from where we've started. However, it's still not at the height that the customer requests. You can find a list of eyebrow heights on Google. Just type in your state, eyebrow height, minimum requirement. It's the same information sheet that the police will use when they're inspecting your vehicle. From the bottom of the lip, and then we're going to come down to an eye level, observe the height, and in this case we're about 320. So if I remember correctly, we're going to have to come up about 35 mil to be at the minimum eyebrow height. Now this car's got about half a tank of fuel and a sub in the back, so for safety's sake I'd say we're going to come up 40 mil, but I will go and confirm our minimum eyebrow heights. I've gone and checked the specs. We do have to come up in the rear to a minimum of 355. Because this guy's considered it's got half a tank of fuel, we're probably going to bring it up to around the 360 mark. Gives a little bit of leeway, ensures that he's not going to get caught with a police officer saying, hey, your suspension is too low. So what we're going to do is we're going to use our bottom locking nut as our start point, and we're going to come up 30 mil just to see how that sets us. We're going to do this on both sides, put the wheels back on, see how it sits, see if we need to make any measurements up or down. We know that we're... Now a little trick for you is if you head over to the MCA suspension webpage, you can get these coilover spanners. Now these will fit most of your coilovers. They're obviously not going to fit everything, but they've got this fantastic hex in the end, which will mean you can essentially double the length of your coilover spanner, making adjustment a breeze. A lot of people will say that, oh, hang on, we're preloading the spring and any of the adjustment that we're doing here is taking out of the spring's capability and we're loading it. As soon as the weight of the vehicle goes onto the spring, you are preloading it anyway. So in this case, we're going to come up to probably another 15 millimeters on top of what we were. Another thing to note is just make sure when you're adjusting your suspension that the eyebrow height that you're going for isn't more than your suspension at full droop. If that's the case, you're going to have to make this shock absorber longer so you can actually get the length out of it, knowing that you're still not going to bottom out on anything. So just keep that in mind when you're doing this sort of process as well. Once again, we're going to snug the tape measure up against the top of the wheel arch. come down, and we're bang on 360 millimeters. Now, what I might add at this point is, in between each measurement, we have been rolling the car backwards and forwards a foot. That enables the tyres to walk out and the suspension all to settle to the correct height. The reason we do this is, as the wheels spread out, the suspension's going to droop a little bit, and it could give you a false reading if you don't rock it backwards and forwards. So if you don't want to go down that process, normally we try and get a measurement, you know, a couple of mil higher than your actual goal measurement that you're going for. Once you take the vehicle off the stands, go for a drive, you'll find the suspension's all settled and you'll be pretty close to exactly where you want to be. We really don't recommend going right on the legal eyebrow height unless your tank's full, you've got a boot full of stuff, due to the fact that, you know, the last thing you want is to be defected for being a couple of millimeters too low. What we're going to do now is take the vehicle back up in the air. We're going to lock that locking ring, make sure it's bloody tight, and then we're going to check that the bottom collar is locked as well. We're going to tighten up all our suspension while it's on the ground, ensuring that everything is all nice and tight. Okay, sorry guys, realised that the GoPro went flat about halfway through filming there. I'll just run you through what we've done. So whoever had put this suspension together previously had put these around the wrong way. This collar here is designed to sit up against this arm to prevent the strut from rubbing, which we can see has been happening quite severely there, up against the arm. So you want to make sure that spacer is on the correct side, otherwise you're going to have dramas with that rubbing. Anytime you've got dramas with that rubbing, you could experience any sort of suspension binding or dramas there, so you want to be careful that you're not running into a scenario where that can happen. Same as last time, we're going to bring it up. I've already brought it up 10 mil from a seated position, and I've taken a measurement. We're sitting at around 340, so I'm going to come up another 15 millimeters, and hopefully that should bring us to the ballpark of the suspension height we're shooting for. It does get quite difficult to tighten this ring up, and that's why I recommend the MCA coilover C-spanners, because you can put that extension on there. Otherwise you may be tempted to start adjusting it off the base, which you really do not want to do. So yeah, there you go guys. We've done the fronts, we've done the rears, we've torqued the wheels up with the torque wrench. Because these have got aluminium wheel nuts on it, we torque them to 120 Newton meters. As you can tell, you know, she's sitting a lot better. We've got the battery charger on this one because it's been sitting for a while. Looks a lot more respectable, a lot less chance of the police wanting to have a bit of a worry about its height. It is completely off the hoist at the moment, and it is sitting perfectly level and looking absolutely stunning. See you next time guys, tune in, don't forget to subscribe, and yeah, watch one of our other videos. Bye guys.